Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report. Joining us now, Tommy Vietor, co-founder of Crooked Media, also host of Pod Save America. And you guys have multiple shows over there, don't you?
We're trying. I have a show I do about foreign policy that's fun. Love it does some comedy stuff. So, we're all just trying to stay afloat here with the anxiety.
I'm sure the foreign policy is a lot of fun these days.
Maybe
we will touch on that in the context of the race. We're now, what did I say earlier? Was it 10 days?
10 days. We're
10 days and
down.
13 hours.
Yeah.
We round down here. So some may say 11. We say 10, 13 hours. Give us a sense of what your sense is of the state of the race. Where are you on, we see the polling and it's sort of all, I don't want to say it's all over the place, but what's your sense of where we're at this point?
I mean, all the public polling's in the margin of error. When you talk to people on the campaign about their private data, they say the same thing, and what everyone is sort of setting you up to see on election day and election week really is that there's 7 battleground states, seemingly all of them are in the margin of error. It's all going to be a question of what the turnout universe looks like and who is able to turn their people out and what that kind of last week or two of momentum, which way people break. So I just feel like it's incredibly close and I hate it.
And I mean, do you see it as close as the media is portraying? I mean, this is a little bit of my frustration has been that yesterday Marist had polling that showed that Trump was effectively tied with Harris in 3 must-win states for him. Yeah. Georgia, Arizona, and North Carolina. If he loses any of those states, it's hard to imagine that he wins the race. And so when you look at the consistency across these must-win states for both Trump and Harris, I get a little bit annoyed when I hear constantly on cable news that this is the closest race in history, because frankly, to me, it feels self-serving. Stay glued to your television sets. This is as anxiety-inducing as you could imagine. And at the end of the day, I feel like I've heard this is the closest race ever a few times in my short lifetime on this planet.
Yeah, I think we all have. Yeah, you're totally right. I mean, I think there's a New York Times national poll out today that had it tied. I think that was spinning people up. But honestly, that was less worrisome to me than if I'd seen, a Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin poll showing Harris down or slipping. So I think you're right. Like in the key battleground states, there have been some consistent numbers showing her up a bit. I think everyone is just kind of scarred by 2016, scarred by the polling misses in 2020, and just unsure if there's been a realignment in terms of voting habits, in terms of the makeup of the parties, and who's going to come out. We just don't know.
What is your, I mean, I have a sense of this. I mean, I've been trying to follow, I don't know, probably about 5 or 6 or 7 people making analyses of early voting, mail-in ballots, partisan divides. John Ralston in Nevada, longtime Nevada writer, says this doesn't look good for Democrats, but there are others who push back on that. We're looking at partisan divides as opposed to independent divides or non-party affiliated, I guess they call it in Nevada. It is driving me nearly insane. I'm curious if you have any insights into this stuff.
Yeah, it's driving me completely insane too. I mean, I think John Ralston is someone who's very smart and well-respected and knows his beat better than, most reporters ever will, which is just Nevada politics. The thing that drives me crazy about early vote numbers is I distinctly remember in 2016, a big segment on MSNBC where one of the kind of daily early vote gurus was saying that based on in Florida.
Right. I remember this.
That Hillary was going to win by 9 or something. You guys remember this? So,
yes, I do remember that.
This has made me just like a nihilist when it comes to early vote, especially when you consider that we're trying to compare it to 2020 and we're trying to compare it to a time when Donald Trump was telling everybody to vote on election day and not vote early. And now there's an infrastructure pushing people to vote early on the Republican side. So I don't know. I just sort of think we'll get the numbers when we get them. I can't get myself to focus on it.
Let's talk about that infrastructure. I mean, I want to get to sort of the themes of the campaigns in the final days, both, judge them on their own terms, but also, on ours. But in terms of campaign apparatus, get out the vote campaigns, one of the things that the early voting does seem to show is that they were able to make that change in behavior by Republicans, right?
Mhm.
Like Donald Trump had said, you need to hand in your ballot. Do not mail it in because of all the shenanigans that goes
Right.
on. Of course, everybody knows that as soon as you put it into the mailbox, it's surveilled, and your propensity to vote for Trump is evaluated. In that case, the vote is stolen and taken
By
into a
Hugo
secret
Chavez.
location.
Yes,
Right. We
yes,
X-ray
yes.
it first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what is your sense of the get out the vote projects? I mean, I've read stuff that in Arizona and Nevada, the leaked logs show that they're knocking on 20, or they're not doing that. Their paid canvassers are lying about 25% of the door knocks that they're doing. But what's your sense of this, both on the Republican side, but also I wonder if you have any insights to the Democratic side.
Yeah, I know. I think Emma's right that the fact that Hugo Chavez died in 2013 is going to make it harder for us to steal this one. But I mean, like if I'm when it comes to just GOTV and field, I think that those efforts move numbers on the margins, like 0.5% to 1%, and that's like a sad and scary thing for a person who worked in Democratic politics to say, because you kind of feel like there's billions of dollars and all this work done, and it's kind of borderline worthless. But in a race this close, that can make a difference. If I were the Harris campaign, they have real internal infrastructure that's controlled by professional people. It's top down. I would feel good about a lot of those battleground state efforts. The Trump effort is like outsourced to Elon Musk and a bunch of random super PACs. It's outsourced to Charlie Kirk and Turning Point USA. And as you noted, Sam, there was this Reuters report that showed that people were saying they knocked on a door that was like 2 miles away from where they were, sitting at a restaurant having a beer. So there's a lot of reasons to think there's some smoke and mirrors. Now, if there's a big, late decider surge towards Trump, I think that's going to swamp all field efforts. But, in terms of just who's doing it better, I have faith in the Harris campaign.
Well, that's also my question for you, because, I mean, you're an Obama alum, right? And the Obama coalition is not what it was, obviously, in 2008. I mean, Obama was able to motivate a lot of mid to low propensity voters and younger people. I mean, Harris is obviously winning with younger people, but it's a different, to me from the outside, I'm not a pollster, but it appears to me that they're targeting basically high propensity voters to raise their floor, and they're banking on Donald Trump not being able to change the dynamics of the race going forward, and included in that pool of high propensity voters. And again, this is Biden's entire campaign infrastructure, right? So they're using all the data that they collected, not just in 2024 for this race, but in 2020 to build out this model of who they're targeting. That's why I think I don't love this. I love Liz Cheney. Mark Cuban is my surrogate, not doing so much stuff with Sean Fain recently. We'll go for do appeal to the business press and that kind of thing. Like, I don't like it, but I also see that based on the model and game plan that they had set forward, it makes sense that they're targeting these never Trump Republicans. Do I think it bodes well, I think, for the future of the Democratic coalition? I'm not sure. But I guess, what's your view of that? Because it's not our politics, obviously, but I can also see why they're doing it, given the circumstances of the race, Harris entering so late and being so poorly defined to the public at this point.
Yeah, I think from what I've read and the people I've talked to, it does sound like there's kind of like two late surges in terms of outreach and targeting. One is younger Black men, and that's why you see her on like All the Smoke. She's doing Club Shay Shay podcast in a little bit. She was on the Breakfast Club, right? There's a lot of effort there. And then you're right, though, it does seem like they think that there's a lot of sort of soft Republican women that don't like Trump, don't like his abortion policy, and are gettable. And they think that, Liz Cheney on stage with Kamala Harris kind of gives them a permission to feel like, okay, I can vote for this party. There's a place for me. I'm welcome. I don't know if that's smart. I'm as worried about it as you are, just because I worry about everything. But it does seem like that's what their data is telling them to do. So we'll see.
Well,
Right.
I want to take both those things. It seems like it's a problem if Harris is worried about, young black men at this stage in the campaign. I mean, right? Like that would be, I don't know, like Trump saying on some level, maybe not quite this level of like, I'm losing divorced 50-year-old white guys. Like that. I mean, it's sort of.
Well, it's like Trump losing white women, which he is right now by a good amount, Sam. So,
Yeah,
right? That's how he won in 2016.
Yeah. But that's not, I mean, that's, yeah, I guess. And it's unclear that we are. I mean, he doesn't seem to, I mean, to the extent that the Trump campaign has a sense of what's going on, they're not making a late pitch to those people. So I wonder, like, how, in terms of their, I guess the totality of the idea of what Harris is doing, I get it too, that they think that there are these votes out there. In fact, let's play this clip of, this is what I think sort of like the strategy references. This is the mayor of Waukesha, Wisconsin. He's a Republican, and this is like, he's speaking out to give a certain permission structure. But let's listen to this report from Fox 6, Wisconsin's Jason Calvi.
It's a Republican city in Wisconsin's largest Republican county.
It's difficult. I mean, the easy thing to do is to just not say anything.
Waukesha Mayor Sean Riley grew up Republican and voted that way for most of his adult life.
I also feel just in my heart that this is something that I need to come out and say.
Saying something that might upset the people who put him in office.
I am going to be voting for Vice President Harris to become our next president.
Riley tells me he voted third party in 2016, voted for President Joe Biden in 2020, but kept that to himself. For other offices, he says he votes Republican more often.
All right,
than
we
not.
don't need to
Now
hear
this
any more. I mean, stay tuned for the report in the next 7 days where his house gets vandalized.
Right.
But I mean, that's the whole theory of their case, right? But one of the things that worries about me is he was never a Trump voter. And 2016, 2020, he's definitely progressed. But how many votes does that get, Harris, in that instance?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're kind of looking for like the Nikki Haley voters, right? And there are pockets of them. I guess what's so challenging about this kind of targeting is I think the New York Times, in one of their more recent polls or analysis, said that they think there's about 1.2 or 1.3 million persuadable voters or truly undecided voters left in the 7 battleground states. The Trump people think there's like 5% of the electorate in those states are persuadable or undecided. The Harris people think it's closer to 10%. So everyone's kind of looking at the same electorate, but making different decisions based on who they think is gettable based on their own data. So I'm with you, like everything's going to matter on the margins. I think you can certainly say there's an opportunity cost to messaging with, the sort of Liz Cheney voter, that you might lose folks who are really young and progressive and concerned about Gaza, for example. I think ultimately you reach those people in very different ways through different channels and programs and things. And that's why like doing a campaign in 2024 is so complicated. But I'm with you. Like it's not a risk-free strategy.
If you look at like the advertising buys now, it really is focused on everything is sort of dropped except for the character issue, which gets around sort of like is again geared towards would-be Trump voters at the margins who are just sick of it. But in that same piece you're talking about, that New York Times piece, they also said that they took all this data from undecideds who watched, and they listed off like all of her media appearances, and they found the best response was to her Medicare proposal to cover elderly people, home health care.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, if they have that data, like where is that on the campaign? I mean, I will accept that there's a limited number of people they're campaigning to. I think their strategy may be a little bit blinkered. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But where's that?
I think you're right. I mean, I think she wants to expand Medicaid to cover in-home healthcare for like 15 million seniors. And I don't know if you guys have ever had someone in your life who hits that age who needs in-home care. It is
100%.
shockingly expensive, jaw-dropping, eyes-watering, unaffordable expensive. And so I'm glad she's talking about this. I think it came up and she talked about it on The View. But I think what you're getting at, Sam, is like the hardest part of a campaign is you can go out and talk about those things, but they don't always get covered. So you end up chasing the kind of shiny object of the Mark Milley, John Kelly comments about Hitler and fascism at the end. And honestly, that worries me a little bit. Like this is like you're getting at the central debate that's going on within all the big super PACs and all the campaigns, which is they message test all these ads, right? They put in a bunch of people with, Xbox joysticks who say they vote up or vote down if this thing works or not. Maybe there's some art and science there. I don't know. Like, I think we should question the efficacy of some of this testing, but it's worth doing. The ads that test the best are the bread and butter healthcare, abortion messages, the ones that feature Kamala Harris talking or real people talking. But the things that, CNN, Pod Save America talk about are these like new information, shiny object events. And you just get pushed and pulled constantly at the close of a campaign to figure out what to focus on. And it's just really hard.
And when you say, like, it just occurs to me now, I remember this poll right before Biden dropped out, and you guys, at PodSave were rightly saying that Biden's candidacy is uniquely flawed in this way, in the sense that it's his age. It's not about the Democrats, it's about his age. And that proved to be right at the end of the day. But there was a poll that CNN put up that showed, single digits percentage of Americans have no opinion of Biden or Trump. I mean, Trump is so well defined. He's been running for president in the public eye, not counting the reform thing, for 10 years at this point. So what everybody already thinks he's extreme. Everybody already thinks he's a fascist. So what new information can you put out there that's going to define him in a different way for people? That focus, I think you guys are right. This is nothing new. And the same thing with his groping of that woman. We know he's a sexual predator. I mean, this has been obvious, and people vote for him despite that. So defining her in a way is the important part. And that's where I think they've made a misstep. Sam and I were talking about this maybe 2 weeks ago. Someone made this point that it's fair for them to understand that when they look at polling, her biggest liability is that she's too liberal, and that's the perception of her. But it's also not the right conclusion to say that that is all based on policy and not based on embracing Liz Cheney enough, and not based on, whatever, these very specific ways to move towards the center. Some of this is just things that she can't change. She's a woman, she's black, and she's from California. Right. Again, you worked on the Obama campaign. That was a whole set of challenges, obviously, for Obama being the first black president. What is your view of how they're trying to navigate her gender and also her race within the context of trying to win this in the final few weeks?
I mean, I think it's funny, the gender part of the conversation. I mean, her gender rarely comes up, it seems.
Never.
She doesn't talk about being a first. Hillary Clinton had it very front and center. Kamala Harris is taking a different approach. I think that's probably the right strategy. I mean, people know when they see her that she would be the first woman president. They don't need to be informed of that. I think race has come up at different spots. Trump attacked her at the National Association of Black Journalists, but she very clearly questioned her race, frankly. She clearly didn't try to take that bait and talk about it more. She wanted to move past it. So she's trying to just sort of stay focused on the more middle class message. I mean, just generally, like, the things that give me hope are, there was a Bloomberg set of swing state polls the other day that found on every economic issue surveyed, Harris had closed the gap or surpassed Trump. This was taxes, interest rates, cost of housing, cost of goods, healthcare costs. The things that terrify me are that 28% of voters think we're on the right track. Joe Biden's approval rating is 40%, and incumbents around the world are getting their clocks cleaned because people are pissed about inflation and the pandemic and everything. So I think she's like swimming against a very real tide is the problem.
What of that like notion that, and I don't know, I haven't seen any polling on this as to who was the change candidate. But what of the shift? What do you understand were the reasons for the shift in the campaign, which went from Republicans are weird, and we can look. We don't know why there was this significant drop in enthusiasm that seems to surround the campaign. And and I'm making that assessment based upon, she's had a marginal drop in the polls. But I mean, just it's anecdotal, but also I'm looking at I can see it in our numbers. I can just you could see at one point, and our numbers tracked almost perfectly new registrations from North Carolina in terms of views. You could lay those two things on there. And then I could also track when people were like, I'm too frustrated by this. They went away. It seems to me there's sort of three things that are accounting for that. They went away from they're weird and we're not going back, which the not going back seems to me to be the best way to sort of make the argument that she's the more of the change candidate than he is. And then the Gaza stuff that she was clearly not going to break with Biden. And we'll get to that in a moment. But what do you think about those first two things? The weird, it's very hard to say. They're weird. And also vote for me because I'm campaigning in the last 2 weeks with Liz Cheney, who incidentally in 2019 said Democrats want to kill babies after they're born. I mean, she's in front of a podium saying this, surrounded by other weirdos. What do you think accounts for that?
I get the sense that the weird messaging was sort of useful for a period and they felt like it ran its course and it maybe stopped feeling new or effective. Not going back. I mean, I think that to me is a proxy for the very real need for just a little more of a break from Biden. I think there was the answer she gave on The View about sort of not rethinking any decision they had made that was very bad. I'm glad to see they've adjusted from that because I think people clearly want a break from Biden. And you're right. I mean, it's kind of a battle between two incumbents, but who will be seen as the change candidate, and Trump, because he just wants to upend everything, often wins those fights. But I'm pretty worried about it. I'm also pretty worried about Gaza, in particular in Michigan, because there was this uncommitted vote. I don't remember the aggregate number. You guys might. It was 100,000 voters, though.
Yeah, slightly over 100.
I mean,
and
that's a lot.
We should say the polling shows, again, just to remind people, we're talking about this on electoral terms at this point, not, moral ones, which I think is clearly she's got a major deficit there. But in terms of the polling, Arab American now favor Trump by 1 point. And this is a cohort that Biden won by 20 points, 25 points, and Clinton somewhere around there as well. I mean, again, we're talking about Michigan and Pennsylvania to some extent as well. These are places where, Michigan has been 10,000, 20,000 votes in the past two cycles. I mean, the 100,000 people vote for committed. You can win 4 out of 5 of those and still there's a huge deficit.
Yeah. I'm really worried about it. I mean, listen, just so your audience knows, I mean, I think Joe Biden's Gaza policy has been terrible. And I've thought that for a long time. And I've said as much. And frankly, in the last few weeks, it's gotten worse as the IDF launches this ground invasion into Lebanon and escalates the series of airstrikes into Beirut and the surrounding areas. I mean, I read a report today that if this continues, you could see 80% of the population of Lebanon going into poverty, because Lebanon has been essentially a failed state economically for several years. No one could get access to money in banks. They haven't had a president. The government is a disaster. There's always sectarian lines that have been drawn. So this is just pouring gasoline on a fire. And so I am deeply, deeply worried about not just the Biden administration's policy on Gaza, but also this perception that we're the party that supports a warmonger like Bibi Netanyahu and are unwilling to do anything to stop the slaughter of innocent people in the Gaza Strip. And so it's really bad. Kamala Harris is in a very bad place. Joe Biden's still the president. She can't kind of undermine him when it comes to foreign policy decisions where he has the most authority. The only thing I'd say to your audience with that long wind up there is, if Trump is president he will give Bibi Netanyahu carte blanche in Gaza, in Lebanon, but also he will let him annex the entire West Bank. I just think folks should know that.
That's the Miriam Adelson. That was $100 million, and he was nice enough to give her the Golan Heights, and she never even had to ask.
But Tommy, in terms of her position, I'm just wondering if you could expand on that more. I'm frustrated that she hasn't broken more. I anticipated that the pressure would be too great, but she's still doing the same working tirelessly, rote, memorized response. And people see through that, especially if you're a progressive online person who is looking for some sort of relief, as we see, children with their brains falling out of their skull and their father wailing in pain, or babies that are basically mush in the hands of their parents. This is the kind of stuff that young people are seeing, and then they see her say the same thing over and over again. I'm sympathetic to that position that she's in, but how can you, what is she being told? That she basically, you can't break from Biden. It looks weak because you have to have this authority as the VP, and also he's the sitting president, et cetera. What's your hypothesis as to why she hasn't even rhetorically broken from him for her own sake?
I think part of it is just political advice. Anxiety about Jewish voters, anxiety about changing the status quo. I'm not saying that's good at political advice. I think it's terrible political advice. The one little shift recently that I saw that I want them to really accelerate is there was, for a long time, every question about civilian casualties in Gaza led to an answer that started with, well, on October 7th, the following happened. And of course that is true. That was a horrific day. No one is questioning that. But we're a year later. Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas, is dead. I would use that as an opportunity to say, Sinwar is dead. It's time to end this war. There's no military utility to what we're doing. We're making everything worse for people in Gaza, or we're making Israelis less safe. Full stop. Get it there. Now, the follow-up is, are you going to cut off aid? And that's where she gets into sort of complicated politics, because she can't say yes as VP. But, maybe you could try to signal that your administration would do things to put real pressure on Netanyahu.
Let's talk about the implications if she wins with the constituency that she's cultivating, right? Mm-hmm. One of the things that there are two quotes from 2016 that haunt me. And, you can look at breakdowns of what was happening tactically in the Clinton campaign that the Harris campaign is clearly not following, right? They're showing up in Michigan. They're showing up in Wisconsin. They're in Pennsylvania. That's basically all the places they've been for the most part. Strategically, it seems like it's a similar campaign in the sense that I remember Schumer saying that, for every vote we lose in Pittsburgh, we're going to gain 2 in the suburbs of Philly. And then the other thing that gets less attention, what he was saying at the time, was talking about the repatriating offshore tax dollars, which they hadn't been able to do. These corporations wait for a Republican to get in office, like George Bush did in 2005, and give them a discount rate. And he was trying to fashion a deal, repatriation of tax dollars at, somewhere between what should be the rate and, George Bush, so let's just call it 10% or 15%. Right. In exchange for an infrastructure deal. And I just remember this vividly because Chuck Schumer talking about himself in the third person just triggers me in some way. But he said, I've got Clinton, I've got Schumer, and I've got Ryan. And we're going to do this infrastructure deal, and we're going to do this repatriation. He's saying this in October, when we all thought 99.3% a chance of Clinton winning, whatnot. But it seems to me that answered the question is why are they not holding Ryan to account? Why are they not holding McConnell to account for their candidate? They basically let those guys take the month of September and August and October off on vacation in 2016. And it feels like at that time, the Clinton campaign was trying to fashion a constituency, right? Because there's a relationship between who gets you elected and, how you're going to govern. Yep. Because if you know that you've won a certain district that may be a purple district, that you've got a certain sort of power dynamic with that congressperson there. They can't go too far out and oppose you on certain things because you've shown strength in there. And it's the same with states. It's the same with largely speaking in terms of like party. What are your fears? My greatest fear is she's going to lose. My second greatest fear is how she's winning if she wins. What does that tell us about what kind of potential sort of like presidency she'll have?
I mean, I hear what you're saying. It's absolutely true that you remember the people who helped you out and who helped you out early, and they get rewarded. That's politics. That said, listen, if Liz Cheney is Secretary of State, I will sorry for swearing. I will flip out. This is not something. I think we have agency here. We can all, organize and lobby and press for the most progressive cabinet possible. And this is where I actually think Kamala Harris is interesting, because Joe Biden came to the White House with like 30 years worth of resumes and close aides and people he'd worked with. And those people, end up getting installed. In the Obama administration, we picked a lot of our people, but there was, we made the mistake of keeping a Bob Gates as Secretary of Defense and like push forward this notion that Democrats can't do national security, that we need like a Republican babysitter in there sometime to help us out. And I think that was a huge mistake. Jim Comey was a huge mistake, right? So we can right those wrongs. Kamala Harris has a blank canvas. Like, we don't know who her people are. We don't know who she'll pick. And I think there will be a lot of opportunity to make it a diverse, progressive, interesting team. So my fear is, first of all, foremost, she loses. But also, if she loses, everyone's going to say what we should do next in a way that confirms their own priors, right? But I think it's most likely that the party tacks back to the right. And that, I think, should worry people.
Well, okay, I want to get to that in a moment, too, because it strikes me as like we don't have... there doesn't seem to be a huge dispute as to how she's running this campaign. The argument that we need to tack right from the Democrats would just simply come like, Joe Biden was too left wing, like people, but there's no data to support that whatsoever. And we can clearly sense how she's campaigning. But one of my concerns is it cuts both ways, right? Like, she's a jump ball in many respects, but on some level, and I don't know how you feel about this, but for me, over the course of 8 years, Obama was, I probably had projected a lot more things onto Obama than were there. I was one of the people who were excited about Reverend Wright, and then I was like, this is a secret message to us, and then it turns out, it took me about a year and a half to realize, like, I actually don't believe he sat in the pew. I don't think he was there for those sermons.
Yeah, I think they had young kids, to be honest, and they were cleaning up diapers at home.
But the question of like her being sort of untethered, it really is a question of like who gets there first and who's closest. And I wonder if what we're seeing in terms of this campaign in the last month and a half is indicative of the perspective that these people have in terms of where she's going to find success. And if, she's trusting him during the campaign, whether it's Karen Dunn or, Tony West or whomever it is, where's the hope she's not going to trust those people when she gets in?
I mean, listen, I think that the targeting decisions at the end are probably being made by people like David Plouffe and, folks like steeped in all their data. And those are just mercenaries who want to win. And I say that with love. These are just people that want to win an election. I know Karen a little bit. I don't know Tony West at all. Tony is Maya Harris's husband. So they're, relative. That's family. I'm not sure what his influence would be. I just think that, when you I think she sort of doesn't totally get enough credit for starting from a standing start just a couple months ago. Like, what they've actually pulled off is pretty shocking and remarkable, how much they've moved the numbers on her approval, on economic issues, et cetera. But because of that, she doesn't have a flushed out policy agenda. She didn't do a million policy speeches. Like, there is a lot of blank slate. And I think we just have to see that as an opportunity. to push her publicly and privately on all the issues we care about, because it worked with Biden, right?
Well,
I mean,
that's what I've been saying, Tommy. I mean, I was very pessimistic about the Biden administration, and I mean, I think he's presided over a genocide. So in terms of foreign policy, I can't, it's difficult for me to levy praise in that regard. But as it relates to domestically, I mean, he has not a lot of accomplishments. I mean, the infrastructure bill is no joke, the Inflation Reduction Act, and even her running on extending the child tax credit again, it's this extremely odd place where she's a new figurehead running an incumbency campaign.
Yeah.
And I think that is something that people, it's why the base is frustrated right now, because it's what she's promising is fairly limited. It's mostly a continuation of the Biden administration, even though they don't want to advertise that. But what gives me hope is the Tim Walz selection. I mean, this all feels very mercenary to me, as you say, this strategy stuff, and it may be bad strategy and maybe good strategy. We don't know right now. But the choice that was hers, we saw, was it came down really to Shapiro and to Walz. And Shapiro had that cover up that may have played into it, but I do think that was a fork in the road. And and Walz has been sidelined a bit because I think they want to put her out there like she's more presidential. The woman's not getting overshadowed by this very likable and accomplished, politician in Walz. And that choice, though, if you're really anti-left, I don't know if you would make that selection, in my view.
I totally agree with you. I think what happened was she did a lot of debate prep and he did a lot of debate prep, and it felt like they were both off the trail for a while. And maybe they said to him, hey, when she's off the trail, we can't have you out doing a ton of stuff, which was, I think, if they did that, would be a silly decision. But he's out a ton now. They're both letting rip. And I agree with you that he is super progressive, far more so than Shapiro. And it spoke to a decision made on a personal connection and not just like pure political calculus about winning Pennsylvania. I totally understand where like progressives in your audience are coming from if they feel frustrated and anxious about this election. I would just ask them to think about one issue, which is climate change, because you're right. Joe Biden, I expressed my views on Gaza earlier, but the IRA is the largest investment in clean energy in the history of the world. Most of that money hasn't been spent yet. And so if Donald Trump is elected, he will just kill it. And he doesn't believe he thinks windmills give us cancer. And so like that is such a important demarcation, I think, and something to vote on, even if you're very mad about Gaza.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, we're looking at two theoretical we have two theories as to who will be president and how they'll treat Gaza. We do know one of them, one of these people delivered Jerusalem as the capital to Israel. Golan Heights allowed them to annex. Delivered the Abrams Accord and structured it in such a way that the idea was like we can leave Palestinians out of this calculation. Totally. And the only other thing I would say in terms of like Harris, and we've talked about this a million times, is that Phil Gordon was probably one of the best things about the Obama administration from my perspective, and there's no indication that he's going to serve anything other than be like her top advisor. Foreign policy advisor when she's president, and it seems completely antithetical to him. I mean, putting aside all moral implications of what's going on there, it's very hard to find to like reason like this is in America's best interest as a foreign policy matter. I mean, I don't see how anybody could come to that conclusion, and he certainly doesn't seem to have. So.
Yeah, Phil Gordon's book is called Losing the Long Game, The False Promise of Regime Change in the Middle East. It's pretty clear where he stands on the massive mistakes we've made over the last 20 years.
Well, Tommy, appreciate your time today. I guess, I think you're on the West Coast, so it's probably not time for you to start day drinking, but there's a lot of people who are gonna, and I guess, I don't know if there's anything that we should watch out for. Do you have any sense? Like, is there something that you're looking for over the next week that you'd be like, okay, this makes me feel a little better or worse?
First of all, thank you for having me, and thanks for all you guys do. This is like a super thoughtful but not uncritical conversation in the Democratic Party, and I think this is the kind of thing this is the kind of conversation we should be having. We shouldn't pretend that Democrats are perfect. No, we're deeply flawed, but it's a choice ultimately. One thing I saw that did make me feel a little better was, so the New York Times poll today, there's 15% undecided. Harris is winning the undecided when pressed 42-32. 2 weeks ago, that persuadable group was tied, which suggests that she's closing a little stronger than Axios would have you think based on nothing, right? And so, like, looking at those kind of numbers, I think that undecideds sometimes break in blocks or en masse, and I think I'm going to keep an eye on that and hope they're breaking towards her.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm going to be keeping my eye on Polymarket because that's where I get all my polling data from now. Betters, crypto betters, you know.
What are they doing?
Emma's working on a VPN so she can bet.
Beautiful.
Pretend that she's betting
I'm
for the
telling
Maldives.
you, I don't bet on the Giants or any other New York teams because my emotional investment is too high. With this election, I can't even imagine having money behind it. It might actually break my heart in two.
Yes, it would.
All right, Tommy, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Have a good one.
Thanks, Tommy.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.